Nutrition science evolves through milestones, moments when evidence deepens and practice transforms. Welcome to Milestones in Pediatric Nutrition, a podcast by the Nestlé Nutrition Institute, hosted by Professor Andrew Prentice. In each episode, leading experts reflect on breakthroughs that shape modern nutritional care, from early life feeding to practice-changing interventions across the life course. Because progress happens, one milestone at a time. This festive season, join us as we celebrate the discoveries that continue to improve children's health worldwide. Welcome to Milestones from the Nestlé Nutrition Institute, your daily dose of breakthroughs in pediatric nutrition this holiday season. Today, Professor Andrew Prentice is joined by Dr. Howarth Bouis to discuss biofortification of staple foods, breeding nutrition into daily diets, a milestone shaping the future of child health.
Welcome to another of our Milestones in Pediatric Nutrition, part of the wider series of NNI Bites Big Learning podcasts. My name is Andrew Prentice, and I talk to some of the world's leading scientists and policy advocates about discoveries, interventions that have made a real impact in improving pediatric nutrition. Today's topic is biofortification of staple foods. Among many other honors, my guest today was awarded the 2016 World Food Prize for his seminal and founding work at HarvestPlus. The HarvestPlus website leads with this visionary thought. What if low-income rural households could get the vitamins and minerals they need in staple foods they eat every day? They can. Through a crop breeding process called biofortification, micronutrient-enriched, climate-smart varieties of 13 common staples provide essential iron, zinc, and vitamin A to rural households to improve nutritional status, health, and livelihoods. This is thanks to a remarkable vision created by my guest, Dr. Howarth Bouis. Howdy, welcome to today's podcast.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. We're honored to have biofortification as one of the topics in your podcast series.
As we were preparing for the recording, I was saying to Howdy that I think this is really one of the most important ones. I'm very excited about this. Prior to beginning his graduate studies, Howdy, as he likes to be known, worked for 3 years as a volunteer in the Philippines with volunteers in Asia. That was back in the early 1970s. He received his BA in economics from Stanford University and his MA and PhD from Stanford's Food Research Institute, a program in agricultural economics. He joined the International Food Policy Research Institute, IFPRI, in 1982 as a postdoctoral fellow, and focused on how economic factors affect food demand and nutrition outcomes. As the founding director of HarvestPlus, where he served for 13 years, he coordinated an enormously successful, as you will hear, interdisciplinary, multi-institutional effort to develop, to test, and to disseminate micronutrient-rich staple food crops among malnourished populations. And it's for this work that he received the World Food Prize. He now resides in the Philippines, undertaking pro bono activities as an adjunct professor at the University of Philippines, Los Baños, HarvestPlus founding director and chair of the HarvestPlus Advisory Committee, emeritus fellow of IFPRI, senior fellow of the Southeast Asian Center for Graduate Study and Research in Agriculture, and guest scientist at the International Research Institute, Rice Research Institute, where he chairs the Healthier Rice Advisory Committee. Dr. Bouis was chair of the trustees of the Micronutrient Forum during 2017 to 2023. So, an incredible background. How do you take us back to the beginning? What started you down the road of biofortification? I imagine the phrase hidden hunger was perhaps high in your mind?
Yes, well, my journey really began in 1993 when IFPRI received a grant to see what our centers that are mainly involved in breeding high-yielding staple food crops for developing countries, what we could do in the fight against hidden hunger. And I received that. I was asked to be director of that project. It was really a 2-year project to develop proposals that could be later funded, but we had to see which centers could do what things to fight hidden hunger. And there were really kind of two approaches that we faced. One was we thought maybe the World Fish Center or the World Vegetable Center, they would be sort of key players in that. But rather, I got very interested in the idea that we could breed staple food crops that had more minerals and vitamins in them. What frustrated me, I learned a lot attending nutrition conferences, and there's a lot of interest in vitamin A, iron, zinc deficiencies. But the main approach to solve the problem was to provide supplements and commercial fortification. Now, these are good investments and they're high returns. But what bothered me as an economist was that there are recurrent costs year after year after year. So, for example, 500 million vitamin A supplements are given out each year. When I first started, the cost was estimated at about $1 a supplement, not to manufacture, but to have the organization to distribute them. And now inflation and everything, it's estimated at $2 per capsule. So that's, either 500 million or $1 billion a year to provide vitamin A supplements. I'm not knocking the supplements, but it saved millions of lives. But you just do the same thing. After 10 years, you spent $10 billion. After 20 years, you spent $20 billion, and you keep giving out the supplements. So I said, what if we can get the plants to do the work? That would be much more efficient. So it was an economic motivation, and that's what got me started. And I got very interested in that, and I wanted to see if I could make it happen.
And I guess at that stage, you didn't really know anything about plant breeding. Presumably someone set you on the road and you started to talk to the experts to discover what the potential was.
Right, exactly. So I love the economic argument for biofortification, but I had no idea whether the science would work. And we really faced four major barriers. One was with the plant breeders. Could we combine high mineral and vitamin density with high yields? Because I knew that the farmers wouldn't accept crops and grow crops that were lower yielding just because they were more nutritious. So I had to talk to the plant scientists. The second roadblock was bioavailability. I got a lot of feedback from nutritionists that, for example, with iron deficiency, only 1 or 2% of the extra iron that we were going to put in the crops would be absorbed. And I knew if that were true, that it wouldn't work.
And that's
then
because
we also
let's just add in for those who may not be familiar with it. That's because of the phytates and so forth in staple crops that can bind the iron and stop it being absorbed.
Correct. And then the third barrier had to do with delivery. So, for example, if we were going to breed vitamin A dense crops, we would change a white sweet potato to an orange sweet potato, a white maize to an orange maize. And there are a lot of people who said that Africans, where these were the main staple food crops, would not accept the change in color. So we'd never get the consumers to accept them. And the fourth barrier was really funding. Plant breeding takes 10 years, and then you have to go through a process of getting farmers to accept them and consumers to accept them. So you have to sustain funding for many years. And if you go and talk to a donor and say, this is a great idea, there's a great return on your investment, but we're not going to have impact for a dozen years, it's hard to find donors that say, oh, great. This sounds like a great idea. So initially the biggest barrier was funding, and we started doing a little bit of research to investigate those first three barriers that I mentioned, and look for money. And it took us 10 years to get enough funding to really start our project, which is HarvestPlus.
let's come to the details of that. And certainly we're going to do a deep dive into HarvestPlus and all of that. But before we move on, just tell me about the orange sweet potatoes and orange maize and the acceptance. I must say that my wife, when she sees all the pallid white sweet potatoes in supermarkets in the UK, she's like, where are the orange ones? But that's not necessarily the universal view.
Right. So I think, it's because we, in the US and probably in the UK as well, we grew up eating orange sweet potatoes. But in Africa, I think there's white maize. Africans are used to eating white maize. They're used to eating white cassava and then also white sweet potato. So the value proposition that I presented that I thought would work was because our varieties could be just as high yielding, they would sell for the same price. So the yellow or orange variety would provide protection from vitamin A deficiency for their families and at no extra cost. So if you got that message across to especially the mothers of the families, no extra cost is from vitamin A deficiency, that was a good enough value proposition that the mothers would go for it. Of course, they would have to taste the varieties. Unfortunately, the taste is appreciated, is liked. So the taste was not a barrier. And so it's nice once people like the orange varieties, they say, oh, those are the nutritious ones, and they like them.
And it's a great marker, which is, we might get time to dive into this at the end, but it's a marker of the fact that they are the fortified crops. So
exactly.
The initial stages were all about, as you say, this agronomic development, deriving hundreds of varieties and then testing them, not only for their ability to concentrate the key target nutrients, but also for, if possible, at least equal and if possible, enhanced agronomic traits. Because as you've just said, farmers will not grow varieties unless they're productive. So take us through that in a little bit more detail, Howdy, that process at the beginning of your journey.
I started with the idea that our centers, especially the ones that developed the rice, the wheat, and the maize varieties, the modern varieties that were high yielding, they spread very well, especially in South Asia, Southeast Asia. The farmers adopted them because they're high yielding. And we reached at least 2 billion people with our varieties. They're very widely spread.
Wow, that's fantastic.
And I said, well, we missed an opportunity. If we had bred more zinc and iron originally into those varieties, people would be eating them day after day after day, and they'd be getting more zinc and iron in their diets, and they wouldn't even have to know it in some sense, because the zinc and the iron don't change the appearance. They don't change the taste. So, but never mind. Our centers are continually producing better and better varieties, higher yielding, more adapted to climate change. If you come back in 20 years, all the varieties that are presently being grown and eaten will have disappeared, and they will have been replaced by better varieties. Mm-hmm. So we missed our initial chance, but we can do it again.
So tell us about the initial targets, Howdy. Sorry to interrupt you, but your initial targets in terms of how much fortification was required to get everybody to buy into this prospect.
Right. Yes, we had to ask the nutritionists, how much extra iron would we have to put into the crops? How much extra zinc? And it was, at first it was a difficult discussion because we wanted them to reduce it to one number, and they didn't want to do that at first, but we finally hit upon 50% of the estimated average requirement. So if women ate, say, 300 grams per day of a staple food crop, and preschooler children ate 150 grams, and you made the calculations of what the density would have to be, how much extra iron and zinc or vitamin A they would get, when you made that calculation, it would be 50% of the estimated average requirement.
Mhm.
So that we started with that, and then the plant breeders had to go to the germplasm banks. They had to look at all the different varieties in the world and see if there was enough, if they could find varieties that had very high densities. So you're looking for variation, you're looking for the variation with the high densities. And for some of the crops, for some of the nutrients, they couldn't find that variation. So they said, no, we can't breed for that nutrient for that crop.
Mhm.
But for this nutrient, we can. So for example, we could hit the zinc target for rice and wheat, but we could not, for example, breed for vitamin A because no rice in the world has vitamin A in the part that's left after milling takes place. And in fact, there's not much iron either in what's called the endosperm. So we couldn't breed for iron. So we chose zinc for rice and zinc for wheat,
Mhm.
and then other nutrients for other crops going through the same process.
So vitamin A, as you said, maize and sweet
Right,
potato.
vitamin A in maize, cassava, sweet potato. We did iron in beans
Mhm.
and iron in pearl millet.
Yeah. Okay.
And then the next step is to cross the dense varieties with the high yielding varieties and eventually come up with high yielding varieties that are also dense in the micronutrient that you're breeding for. And that can take, if you're lucky, it might only take 6 or 7 years. On average, they told me in the beginning it would take 10 years,
Mhm.
but it could take longer depending on how the breeding goes. Then once you have a variety that you're happy with, it's high yielding and dense, you can't immediately release it to farmers. You have to go through something called the varietal release committees. And they have to certify that this variety grown in multi-locational trials over at least 2 years, it meets certain agronomic standards that the varietal release committees set, so that when these seeds are sold to farmers, it can be certified that they should get a certain standard yield. So you have to do those 2 years, and then once a variety is approved by the varietal release committees, that's when you start multiplying seed, and you really have a small quantity of seed to begin with. So it takes a couple of years to bulk up, have enough seed to start distributing it to farmers.
Mhm.
And then you usually have to show the farmers how those varieties grow. You have to set up demonstration plots. You have field days, and you're basically at that point advertising these new varieties to farmers.
That's such a journey. I mean, as I'm listening to you, Howdy, I'm struck by the determination that you and the wonderful team that you gathered around you must have had to see the way to the future, despite all these challenges that you had. So HarvestPlus started in 2003. And how long was it
Correct.
then till you released your first varieties?
Yeah, the first varieties were released in 2010. They were bean varieties in Rwanda, and then we started releasing some of the vitamin A crops in Africa in 2011, 2012. The orange maize, the yellow cassavas. Now, orange sweet potatoes already existed. There was some breeding done to increase the vitamin A content of existing orange varieties, but they weren't, they were a very small percentage of total production in Africa.
Mhm.
And there hadn't been a lot of breeding to improve their agronomic properties. So for the orange sweet potato, it was more a matter of trying to improve the agronomic properties to make them just as attractive as the white varieties in terms of their yields.
Mhm. And I guess the propagation of these is really tricky because we've talked about seeds, which I suppose is the simplest of those. But for sweet potato and cassava, you need, is it called slips and cuttings?
Yes, exactly. It's vegetatively propagated. So you'll take a section of sweet potato vine and plant that section of sweet potato vine. but I think it's something like a week. You have to replant it within a week. So when you're multiplying vines for distribution to farmers, you have a fairly limited area in which you can operate when the planting material can be disseminated. Of course, you can set up many different places where you're multiplying seed or the vines for the cuttings. It's the same with the cassava. You cut the stalk into several different pieces, and you plant the pieces. I think their shelf life is more like 2 or 3 weeks. So you can do it a little more widely with cassava. But if you have a regular seed like a rice seed or a bean seed, they can be stored for months. So you can ship them around, and it's a much easier process.
Absolutely. So now I don't want to focus on the negatives at all, but there were lots of challenges. It was a very exciting time, I'm sure, but there were lows as well as highs. And I saw some of these challenges when you and others honored me to become part of the program advisory committee for HarvestPlus. And it really opened my eyes as to what the struggle was. Tell us a little bit about the challenges, but let's then move on to the high points.
Okay. Well, I think it's the time. The challenge, the big challenge, was the time that it takes to have impact. We had an earnest. How do I describe? We had an earnest discussion with the Gates Foundation in 2010 about this, and they said we think you're just interested in research. You're not disseminating the varieties. And we said, well, the nutritionist said we need to reach 50% of the estimated average requirement. We don't want to start disseminating the varieties till we reach the breeding achieves 50%. We have varieties now that we could release that are 25. I mean, that are 50% of the target, but not the full target. And they said, no, start distributing those varieties right now. We know you don't have money for all the crops you're working on to take money away from the breeding for all the crops. So you're going to have to get rid of some of the crops to have the money to start disseminating the ones that you really want to start disseminating. And so that was a very difficult discussion, a very difficult time for us. We were very lucky that just as this was happening, Canada showed up and gave us a huge grant that we weren't expecting. There's a big story behind that, but I don't have time to describe it. So we were able to maintain all the crops, but we started the dissemination process. Those first varieties that were released were 50% of our original target. And then later varieties had higher and higher densities until we could reach the full target.
But if I may butt in, so you told me that you've raised over 500 million over the 20 years for this. I want to give a quick call out for the UK government as well, which pitched in.
Absolutely.
What I saw was you were not only acting as a scientist driving the vision, but I think maybe your primary job was as a fundraiser, to go out to articulate the need, articulate the vision, and get people on board. Am I right in that?
Oh yeah, no, I spent a lot of my time doing just that. You just can't do any of this work unless you have funding. And so it was a constant challenge to just visit as many donors as you can, explain what you're doing. As you gather evidence, positive evidence, it gets easier, of course. The Gates Foundation, the first grant we got from the Gates Foundation after 10 years of trying was $24 million. And that not only was that a lot of money for us to start the work, but it just gave us credibility. People said, oh, the Gates Foundation gave you $24 million. Oh, maybe this is a good idea after all.
Yeah.
And it just made things a lot easier.
No, that's great. So let's move to the high points now. So you had some really successful efficacy trials. Tell us about
Yes.
perhaps an example would be the bioavailability of provitamin A.
Yes, definitely. A lot of the high points were associated with the bioavailability, efficacy, and effectiveness of our nutrition research. So when we started trying to set targets for vitamin A crops, we assumed a conversion rate of 12 units of provitamin A gives 1 unit of retinol. But we found that the bioavailability in the matrix of staple food crops, the bioavailability of provitamin A was anywhere from 3-to-1 to 6-to-1. So that just meant that that we could lower our in a way we could lower our targets, or if we hit our targets, we were providing more than 50% of the estimated average requirement. So that was really exciting, and I thought that was a pretty seminal finding for nutritionists to know that about food, that the bioavailability was higher in staple foods for vitamin A than it was for vegetables and fruits. By the same token, we mentioned the iron bioavailability. There were a few people who said they thought that the 1 or 2% was much too low, that there were studies that were done that estimated this. They were done in developed countries. They were short-term feeding trials, that people who were more deficient in iron would absorb at a higher percentage. That would be the big determinant, was their iron status. A low iron status would generate a higher rate of absorption.
Mm-hmm.
And also this adaptation, that you had to be eating these higher iron foods for a while before the body adapted to that. They're wary of iron. Iron can be harmful.
Yeah.
So they're very wary of extra iron in the diet, but if you need it, the body finds ways of processing and absorbing it. And our first high iron rice study, efficacy trial, found that for some of the subjects with initial low iron status, they were absorbing above 10% of the iron. So that was really exciting for me, because we'd heard for 10 years when we were trying to raise funding that the bioavailability would be so low.
That was exciting for me also, Howdy, and I think that was my role when I was invited onto the pack and worked with your colleague Howarth Bouis, who did all the trials, and it was very impressive, more impressive than I was expecting it to be, I must say. So you have very ambitious targets on how many families you'll reach. How are we doing in light of those?
Yeah. So, of course, where did my original ambition come from? It was, I said, we reached, with our modern varieties, our centers reached at least 2 billion people, probably more than that. So why not? Why couldn't we reach all of those people after a certain amount of time? As varieties, we piggybacked on the agronomic varieties. We just piggyback on them, and then we eventually replace all the existing varieties. So when I was director, I said, we want to reach 1 billion people with the biofortified crops. And a lot of people sort of hung their heads and said, that's a little unrealistic. Maybe the truth lies somewhere in between. But one of the high points for me in the last 2 or 3 years is that in Pakistan, we had a big breakthrough in Pakistan. Wheat varieties, the way wheat production works in Pakistan, a certain variety becomes very popular because it's the highest yielding variety. And a lot of farmers, or most of the farmers, want to grow it. So they have something called mega varieties that account for up to 50% of the total wheat production. Now, these mega varieties come and go. They develop susceptibility to viruses. And over time, the viruses mutate and they're replaced by the next mega variety. And right now, the mega variety in Pakistan is a high zinc variety. It out yielded the previous mega variety by 7%, and it's heat tolerant. Farmers adopt it. They don't even know how much zinc is in it. They adopt it because of the agronomic properties. But we now account for 1/2 of the wheat supply in Pakistan.
Which
So
is a large country.
the wheats get blended. So we don't know exactly if half of the country ate the biofortified wheat every day, we'd reach half of the country. And that's 120 million people. If everybody in the country ate biofortified wheat every other day, we'd reach the whole country. And so we'd reach 240 million people. So the truth is somewhere in between. So you can't put a precise number on that. But let's say we reach 150 million people in Pakistan today. Biofortified crops have been released in 40 different countries, but it's probably above 40. I've been saying that for the last 6 or 7 years. So I think it's above 40 countries now. We just don't have the funding to go and try to measure how many people are eating the biofortified crops. But our top two probably account for 200 million people. So, 400 million might be a good guess for the number that we're reaching now, something like that.
That's hugely impressive. And what I sense is that now you've sort of lit the fuse, and now it's going to be self-sustaining and increasing over time, I hope. I want to,
that's what we hope.
We need to wrap up soon, Howdy, but I just want to pause a moment and ask you for a quick reflection on why you use traditional crop breeding rather than modern techniques of genetic modification, which I think would have been a lot easier.
Well, the reason was really that first of all, biofortification itself, there was a lot of skepticism about biofortification, just using conventional breeding. And second, there was a lot of opposition to GMOs. And I thought the best strategy was to prove that biofortification could work with conventional breeding, avoid all that controversy with GMOs. Yeah. And then once we'd proven that biofortification can work with conventional breeding, then people would be open. Okay, now let's do it with GMOs. We can be much more impactful with the use of GMOs and many new agricultural technologies that are just so much more powerful today than when we started in 2003. So, I'm very excited about the future. We can work on multiple nutrients in the same crop. We're not constrained, so about golden rice. Mm-hmm. We're not constrained by the fact that there's no vitamin A in any rice variety today when you use these other techniques. So, and the densities are much higher. People don't know that the golden rice, we also have a variety. We have Golden Rice Plus, which is high in zinc, high in iron, and high in vitamin A. In the Philippines, if you would substitute the Golden Rice Plus for the regular rice at the same price, the zinc density is so high that we would double zinc intakes in the Philippines. You would add 9 milligrams of zinc per day to Filipino diets on average. Our zinc wheat in Pakistan is adding 4 milligrams of zinc per day.
That's truly impressive.
Plus, we'd double vitamin A intakes for the low-income groups, and we'd increase iron intakes by 25%. And that's all in the same variety. So it's just so much more powerful to use these new techniques.
It is, but at the end of the day, then, so the science is there, the agronomics is there, the engineering is there, but as yet we're still struggling with public acceptance. And once we can overcome that, if we can overcome that, then, as you say, the future is enormously powerful.
Yes, and it just takes 1 or 2 countries to start the ball rolling. And then people will see what its impact is. And then the other countries will say, hey, we want that too.
Yeah. So, Howdy, we have condensed into 25 minutes or so your life's work. So inevitably, we've missed huge swathes of what you have achieved. But even so, I'm sure our listeners will be in no doubt that you are one of the heroes of nutrition. You're certainly one of my heroes of nutrition. And it remains for me to thank you on behalf of millions, hundreds of millions of mothers and families who are trying to do their best for their children. You should be immensely proud of the visionary program you led and are continuing to support. Thank you, Howdy.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Andrew, for having me. And of course, it's been a huge team effort all around. And so, now I wish I would have been maybe been born 30 years later and been able to be around for all these new technologies and the huge impacts we can have with them.
Well, listen,
so thank you again.
I'm sure playing golf to keep fit, you will be around for the next 30 years and you will see the true fruits of all you've done. Thank you again.
Okay, I hope so.
Thank you again, Howdy. And thank you, listeners, for joining this edition of our podcast, Milestones in Pediatric Nutrition, part of the NNI Bites Big Learning series. Please do subscribe via the NNI website or the NNI 365 app to ensure that you don't miss future podcasts in this Milestones series.
Thank you for joining us on Milestones. For expert-led discussions, scientific publications, and educational resources, visit the Nestle Nutrition Institute website. Follow us on our social channels and subscribe to never miss an episode. Join us again on Monday as we take nutrition science further, one milestone at a time. Wishing you a season of learning and discovery.